Hey everybody, John Felt here. This is first edition of Weather Wise Guys. I have Craig Edwards with me, and we are going to be talking about all sorts of things that come into our mind. Maybe start with you, Craig. Where's that picture from there with your smile there and that jacket?
Yeah, that was the Target Field. About 2 years into doing a job as a meteorologist for the Minnesota Twins, one of my coworkers from the Target Field on the ground crew, his wife picked up that lab coat for me, and then I went to Taylor, and they put all the logos on there for me. So that was the official lab coat of the game day meteorologist at Target Field from 2010 to 2015. I retired that. The last ball game in 2015 at Target Field, I was able to throw out the first pitch against the Kansas City Royals. So that lab coat now is in the archives of the Minnesota Twins, and I don't know if it'll ever be put on display or just stay in the archives along with somebody's first home run in the major leagues with the Twins.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Did that pitch make it to home plate?
Let me tell you, John, it was a nice, slow curveball on the outside corner that Javi Baez would have struck out on. And matter of fact, I got the ball right here. It's got a little bit of scuff on it. You can see that right here. I meant it hit right before home plate. Actually, it was on the other side of home plate in the dirt a little bit. So, yeah.
Well, there you go. Hey, these other pictures are when we started or earlier in our career, I guess. That's a picture of me pretty close to when I started my career. And we'll be talking about that blue monster there. That's called AFOS and different transmissions here. And here's Craig. This is when, where were you at here, Craig?
Chanhassen Weather Office. We moved the office from the International Airport at Minneapolis in March of 1995. And we had the big rollout of the joint offices of the National Weather Service Forecast Office, the National Weather Service North Central River Center, and the NOAA Remote Sensing Center all in the same building out in Chanhassen, Minnesota. We had a big dedication there. It was like the Taj Mahal of the Weather Service. Rich Augustus came out. We had the congressman out there, and it was quite the show. So we showcased our new office there in Chanhassen in March of 1995. It's hard to believe it's been, 30 years, going on 30 years since we've moved to Chanhassen.
Well, I think, how many years of weather experience do we have? I think we both got interested in weather when we were about 10, 12 years old, but we have about, 80 plus years of weather experience.
Yeah, I started with the Weather Service in July of 1972, worked at Milwaukee, worked at Indianapolis, then at Minneapolis, and then after I retired from the Weather Service at Minneapolis, I worked for public radio and the Minnesota Twins, so I actually had meteorology experience going back to 1972.
Wow. Yeah, I started in 79, actually 78, I guess, and many different locations. I'll share that in a future post. Good. So let's talk a little bit. I noticed Tom Skilling retired recently, and I didn't know maybe as much as you, because you were up in you were up in Minneapolis and he was in Chicago. But I definitely remember that he was one of the TV meteorologists that really dug into the science very early on. Do you have any memories of
Tom Skilling began his career doing TV weather when I was at Milwaukee. I first met him when he got off the plane to start with a TV station in Milwaukee. I think it was WTMJ. And he worked there a couple of years, and then he moved on to America's station, WGN, in Chicagoland. He was quite the well-known meteorologist at that time. WGN, when they went cable, they were like coast to coast. So he was the original Weather Channel, I think, in my history of weather. That Tom Skilling was the #1 meteorologist across the country and had a great career. I think 47 years I saw that he worked for TV, and most of that was with WGN.
Well, anyway, we wish him well in retirement. He was one of the pioneers in TV meteorology. So let's take a look over the last week. And one of the things that you mentioned to me is how wet it's been over the southeast and up the mid-Atlantic. This is on the right is rainfall estimates from the last week, 2 to 5 inches of rain. and quite a bit of flooding in the southeast U.S. And that's a trend that goes back right through the last month or so. So that's an area that's prone towards flooding, and more rain is expected this week. And I'm really afraid, I always used to describe it in my career as like you're sort of getting to a cliff. First one pushes you a little bit closer, second one a little bit closer, and finally you get one that sort of pushes you off that cliff, and all of a sudden you're flooding instead of minor, it becomes major. So anyway, that's something that looks like we're going to get some pretty heavy rain this week. Keep an eye on that if you're in those areas. Okay, so let's talk about winter here. And this reminds me of all the times when I had calls with you and you were up in Minneapolis. What's the weather like, by the way, in Fort Myers today?
We were pretty warm, and Saturday we were warm as well. I think we had a heat index at 95 over the weekend. For cold front went by, cooled us down a little bit, and we had a very comfortable morning in the upper 50s. Looking for a high today about 80 with some sunshine, and we're going through a little bit of a dry spell here. We had a dry cold front come through, and no showers with that. The rain that was up in southern Georgia and northern Florida died out as the front moved its way south. But we had a sort of a normal winter here in southwest Florida, where the temperature was actually below normal in February and right near normal in December and January, and our precipitation was above normal. So southwest Florida is doing pretty good as far as precipitation and temperature. So nothing too extreme to talk about down in southwest Florida, but the rest of the country, my goodness, up in Wisconsin and Minnesota and northern Iowa, very mild winter.
Well, you were the meteorologist in charge in Minneapolis for how many years?
1991 through 2006. And I was up there, John, when we first began a career up there, and as the chief meteorologist for NOAA. We had that 1993 flood, as you well recall, in Iowa, the thing that was just horrendous flooding down the Mississippi River. And then, of course, we had the 1997 flood up in the Red River Valley. So I was up there for both of those two major flood events.
Well, you wonder what, when I look at this, I think this is really the defining weather story for this past winter. Is this dark red represents a record mild winter. And this is Minneapolis. And, we had a cold spell early on, but this area in pink here, that's, the upper range of height or of temperatures, and almost the whole winter was up there. So what are people doing up there? I mean, you and I used to talk all the time during winter, and I'd say, sort of joke with you with those minus 30s and high temperatures below zero. I mean, have you talked to anybody up there? What are they talking about this winter?
Winter to show up, and then when it did show up, it was sort of like a one punch, and they had temperatures that got below zero, and everybody thought that this winter had showed up, and then a couple of days later, back up in the teens for lows and the 30s for highs. So they really had maybe one or two cold spells. And very little snowfall. I think less than 10 inches in Minneapolis. And when it did snow, it lasted only a couple of days. So very disappointing when it comes to recreational activities for cross-country skiing and ice fishing. And that extended all the way into Wisconsin, by the way. Milwaukee had the warmest winter on record by far. And, of course, Minneapolis had the warmest winter on record going back to the 1800s.
Yeah, like you said, that area, the upper Midwest, Great Lakes region, they look at winter as a time for recreation up there. So, it's called the lost winter. That's what it's being referred to. So, we'll be talking a lot about that, especially as it gets into spring. Now, one of the things talking about spring, I like this graphic here. It gets observations of either spring, the initial green up, or the full bloom. And you had asked me before this call, is it green up here in St. Louis? And I was, the grass is green. So that dark red is showing, 2 to 3 weeks ahead of normal. And in some areas, parts of Kansas, along the Iowa border with Missouri, that's a record early green up. And you might say, well, what does, that mean? Well, I mean, certainly people are waiting for spring. That's nice. But from a flood perspective, when you get green up, it tends to increase the friction when it does rain. It keeps that rain on the ground a little bit longer, which allows it to soak in. Eventually, we get evapotranspiration, and that gradually reduces the risk of flooding. So there's a hydrometeorological aspect of that as well. So anyway, we're getting spring up here. I noticed you got a little blue here. Blue is not much blue on this map, but a little bit of blue in North Florida. That means it came in a little bit later than normal.
Well,
Okay, and what did you say you wanted to say on that?
Pointed out everything we need to know. The green up, we talk about the green up and the precipitation, but here we are, second week of March, and there's hasn't been really what we call a severe weather outbreak yet. There's a couple tornadoes occurred west of Chicago a while back, and first known tornado occurred in Wisconsin for the month of February earlier on, but there really hasn't been what we would call an outbreak of severe weather so far this spring. So something to look ahead to as we go through the month of March.
Yeah, I'm putting out a post tomorrow about how El Nino influences severe weather. Maybe next week or the week after in this we can talk about that a bit. So anyway, one of the things we're going to reminisce a little bit about our early career, how in some ways it's so primitive compared to now. And Craig and I talk a lot about the Fujita wheel and how we used it. The Fujita, Dr. Fujita, Ted Fujita, was a pioneer in tornado research, University of Chicago. And maybe give me a little what you remember the Fujita wheel to be, Craig.
Dr. Fujita, along with Alan Pearson, created what we call the Fujita scale. And Alan Pearson didn't get credit for what he called the Pearson scale. And Dr. Fujita created the intensity scale, and Alan Pearson had what they call the P scale, which was the distance and the width of the tornado track. And so we don't talk about that much, but Alan Pearson was side by side with, of course, Alan Pearson at the time was head of Severe Storm Center in the 70s as they were delving into the Fujita scale. I remember doing research on S scales and how intensity the tornadoes were, all based on the work of Dr. Fujita. But out of his work and associated with the satellite imagery that was coming into play with the Weather Service, we would get these 8x8 images, black and white images off a fax machine, clear pictures. And in order to make it animated, the olden days used to flip through stuff real fast to sort of animate it. And back in the Weather Service, they said, what are we going to do to animate these things? They came up with a wheel they called the Fujita wheel. And it was a disc about 3 to 3.5 feet in diameter, red disc. And what you would do, Johnny, you would tape these satellite pictures that would come in every half hour. You would tape them around the perimeter of the wheel. You would focus a strobe light on there in a dark room. Then you would start this wheel spinning, and the strobe light would essentially simulate an animation. So you talk about childhood play back in the Weather Service. We were taping with Scotch tape these satellite pictures on there in a dark room with a strobe light going on in order to get an idea how the cloud formations were moving and developing. Now, mind you, these pictures were coming in a half hour after they were taken, so we were losing some of the real-time development of some of these thunderstorms. So very, very good tool at the time, but certainly not what we're looking at when it comes to TV weather and when it comes to weather on web pages. You see satellite pictures almost instantaneously the time they're taken. So very good tool for severe weather development.
Yeah, I was an intern during that time in St. Louis, and that was my job, is to put those satellite pictures on the wheel. And now you can see these satellite pictures, like you said, in almost real time. Anybody can see them on a cell phone. So it really shows how things have changed in the last 50 years or what that might be. So anyway, I guess we'll wrap it up today. I hope you enjoyed this. Hey, have you noticed I got
my Billikens hat on? How are they going to do in the tournament this year, John?
Well, they came in second last in the A10. Didn't quite meet expectations, and Craig and I have talked about that. So the A10 tournament starts tomorrow. I'll be watching that. Who are you following this year? What's your favorite team?
Well, Indiana, I think, finished out the season with 4 wins in a row. They beat a tough Michigan State team yesterday. So they're probably hoping at this stage for an NIT bid. But I think I'm liking Purdue in the tournament. I think Purdue's got all the key players to get the job done. I think Purdue should go far in the tournament this year.
I watched the women's Iowa and Nebraska, the end of that game with
Caitlin Clark.
Really star Caitlin. Oh my God, that was an amazing finish to that game, and that was amazing watching her. But just the overall game that was pretty exciting. Yep. Okie doke. Well, nice talking to you, Craig. I'll be talking to you again probably next Monday. Take care. Okay. See you.